Yes.
Okay, good. Good morning, people. Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. And first, I want to thank Rick Morales, Kwanzaa Humphrey for being here, and also I'm seeing Bobby Chair Stein, John Baker, and Marty Lenahan. So I appreciate you all showing up for that. What I'd like to do first is can I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please? All those in favor, say aye. Great, thank you. And to Chris Pruitt, please give us a value number.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Crystalline Pruitt, Senior Manager of Generation Support and the Chairperson of Women in Trades, our resource group here in JEA. Generation Support provides financial and contractor oversight for operations and maintenance at Northside Generation Station, and Women in Trades is a JEA resource group that supports women who work in the trade as well as promoting women to enter trade careers. Our safety protocol is on the screen here. Please silence your cell phones, please, and pay attention to the screen. You can read that. The value I chose to highlight is respect. We often say respect is earned and not given, but it may sound really great as a movie tagline, but I think that is nothing further from the truth. Respect is a gift that should be given liberally. When you think about that, it's hard. It's easy to give a gift to people we consider worthy. However, there are so many people that we don't like, we don't get, and we don't want to be bothered with. So how do they get our respect? One simple word: empathy. Empathy is defined as an action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of others, or the act of fully inhabiting something observed. Empathy is the bridge. It connects you to a person that you may have little to nothing in common with. It does not have to find commonalities to validate another's personality, logic, or how they operate. A person's ability to empathize keeps our own personal biases from becoming the standard of perfection and opens us up for real collaboration, engagement, and psychological safety for all. As we think of the accomplishments of our nations and our company's progress and empathize with those who have had different experiences and understanding, you'll find their challenges are your challenges and their victories are your victories. Respect is what the movements were about. The Black History months that we're going to celebrate and the Women's History Month that we're going to celebrate next month. It was because people who did not have the same experience inhabited the experiences of others and changed the world. And that's my values moment.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We appreciate it. And Landon, comments from the public?
We do not have it this time.
Okay, sorry, Landon, so no comment?
That is correct. There are no comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to move on to the contract ratification, and Laura Shepard, please.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Today I'm wearing my compliance hat rather than my external affairs hat. It's a pleasure to be with you. Historically, the JEA CEO approved contracts, including large ones. But in June 2021, this board decided to implement a $50 million limit, such that the board approval was required to approve contracts above $50 million. In August of 2022, due to politics, pressures on natural gas prices, the board amended that delegation up to $100 million. So today we're presenting 5 contracts for large water capital projects. Large contracts here are negotiated and approved in segments of commitments. Typically they start at a small dollar amount and they expand as JEA contractor approves design and determine marketing. So today we'll present 4 contracts from the recent past that followed this segmented increase pattern, but where pricing ultimately exceeded the delegation cap in place at the time. We are asking the committee to recommend that the board ratify those. A 5th contract is for a current project. I'll describe it as well, and we are asking the committee to recommend that the board approve it next week. So I've described the issue, but I anticipate that the committee has a really good question. How and why did this occur? Our procurement process retained the same review and approval steps as it had in the years prior to you all setting the CEO delegation of authority cap through 2 resolutions. So large contracts are reviewed and they go through an extensive approval process with our awards committee, the budget process, and legal reviews as it's spelled out in the procurement code. But our procurement code did not evolve correctly to match the delegation resolutions that you all enacted. So consequently, when the 5 contracts we'll present today near the $50 million limit or the $100 million limit, our procurement system did not hit a pause and route those over for board approval. So we recognize this error, and our procurement team is already putting steps in place to correct it. This will include eventually updating the P code to incorporate language that confines the awards committee to approving contracts only under the $100 million delegation authority. Now we have to come to you to change the P code, so we're not waiting to improve our processes. We will flag large contracts and pull them out of the awards process, and in fact, we're already doing that. That's how you come to the 5th contract today. And even next month in March, we anticipate bringing you something that requires your review and approval connected to significant projects at Buckman. We also recognize the need to supplement the amount of information that you receive about these significant capital projects. You learn about them in our budget presentations, but we will do more to highlight these. So we can go to contract 1.
Hey, Laura, if I could ask a question real quick, and if it's going to be explained in the following for the 4 contracts or the 5th one. But I guess for the contracting mechanisms that JEA has, when it comes time for the final price, how is that controlled? And I guess my point is, as the program, whatever it's contract for, is executing, and it could be an out-year one, at what point does the final price, is it determined?
I'm going to let Jenny McCollum or Ray Marshall speak to that.
Good morning. Hear me okay?
Yes, I got you right.
Okay, excellent. So the question is at what point is the final price determined? And so typically the final price, or what we call the guaranteed maximum price, is determined substantially when design has been completed, typically 90%. Too close. Typically at 90% design. It could also be at 100% design, but that's typically the time that it's determined.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Contract number 1 concerns the Greenland Water Reclamation Facility. The result will be a new 4 million gallon a day facility expected to be online in Q2 of fiscal year 25. The initial contract with Haskell started at $500,000 in 2019. It expanded to $10 million in December of 2020 as design proceeded. At the 90% design stage in December of 2021, the negotiated contract price rose to $118 million. In November of 2023, JEA and Haskell reached a final price of $122,101,114.94. If no questions, we can proceed to contract 2. Oh, yes, Mr. Baker.
Final price is arrived at.
Ray can
Obviously,
elaborate
there's not
on
a
that.
bid, so how do we know we're being treated fairly?
Excellent question. How do we know that the final price is, I'll call it a competitive or a good price? In addition to what the CMAR gives us, we also have estimates for what we think the price is going to be. And in some other instances, we will have another engineering firm validate whether or not that is a good price.
Okay.
And so there are how shall I say, kind of like guardrails or things or checkpoints that we know that those are good prices.
What was the budget going into this? I mean, where will we when back in 2020 when this started, because our kind of 19 when the budget when it started designing, what was the forecast budget at the time, and how is that?
I'm going to have to ask, I don't have that immediate information as far as what the budget was back in 2019. We can get that for you.
But I mean, it's just always interesting to find out, you know, where did we start and how did we get here? And to just kind of get these final numbers, it just makes it a little tough to really, you know, I had the same question Mr. Baker did regarding the final pricing and so forth, and the steps JEA takes in the whole procurement process. So maybe we need a little bit more education on that.
I think going over the CMAR or the collaborative delivery methods, I think that would be good, and we can certainly bring that back to the board for the different methods that we use to procure. I will say that, including what the original budget was.
Yeah, I am still interested
in going forward. What I will say, when this started, when the CMAR or the collaborative delivery started, it was pre-supply chain and pre-COVID. And so we've seen increases on the regular, as the board's fully aware, on the regular delivery. And so same thing similar for, I'll call it the alternative delivery.
In our latest budget, what had we forecast this to be?
For this project?
For this project, yes. I mean, you know, back in, you know, when we were in 2021, you know, we've obviously gone up from 118 to 122 for some reason.
Mm-hmm. We can get that information.
But so you had somebody look at it, that comparable price, what is the comparable price today for 4 million gallon reclamation water plant? I mean, do we have any information there?
So every water reclamation plant isn't going to be the same, but we do look at what other contracts have come in for other utilities. We look at that as a data point. We, in times, get an outside engineering firm to look to see And so we look at other things to see if we're getting a good price. But every water reclamation plan, depending,
I understand that, but you said you have somebody else, other engineering firm to look at it. What did they say? Do we have any background on what they said when you had them look at it?
I don't have that specific, but if it was something that we weren't comfortable with, if it wasn't within the ballpark of what we thought was reasonable, in each one of these contracts, we have what's called an off-ramp,
I'm sorry.
meaning that we don't have to continue with the CMAR, that we could take that design or we could take that and go bid that project out if we don't believe that it's truly competitive.
So during this process, when it first starts, are suppliers obligated to give us projections of what the anticipated cost would be along the life of the project? So do we know, or so this 500,000 is where we start? It just seems like such a large jump to end at 122 million.
That's an excellent question. So the CMAR process is meant to, the price is going to, I'm not going to use the word expand. The price is going to increase because the first tranche is simply for design. So the 500,000 or 400 is for the firm to do the preliminary design. And then as you start doing the design, you start having an idea as far as what the construction cost is going to be. So it's almost like apples and oranges. The first part is for the preliminary initial design. And then once you get to the end, that is the amount to construct the entirety of the project, including equipment, procurement, and all of that. So it's the process is meant to go like
Sort of
this
ramp
as far as the cost. But with Board Member Morales and what the chair is asking is, what was the estimate and where did we end up? What was the budget and where did we end up? But I don't want this to look like, oh, we thought it was going to be 500,000 and then it ended up being 122. That's not the case at all. We could have had an estimate of 100 million for the entirety of the process and it might have ended up at 122. It's just done in phases. So the first phase is going to be a smaller amount and then keep going.
This basic process is the way I do almost all my contracts and so forth. The first part, pre-construction, and here's design. But I'm just curious, the checkpoints or the deltas of what changed and so forth, and why did the budget change? And then also it's a third-party review that obviously on a $122 million contract, there need to be some guardrails.
Right. And perhaps the budget did change and perhaps it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps some of these were within a reasonable amount, maybe less, and maybe some are over.
Mm-hmm.
But that information we can bring.
Please.
But I think the big question is, what are lessons learned here on this project? I mean, we did have supply chain issues. We can't ignore that. I mean, Rick's in the construction business. But it'd be worth, what are lessons learned and how can we?
You're spot on. In a subsequent presentation, you're going to hear from internal audit. And one of the projects that we asked internal audit to look at was a part of our CMAR process. For that very reasons, as far as lessons learned. And I don't want to go into a whole CMAR here, but at what point do we bring the CMAR, which is basically the construction firm, in? At what point of design? Earlier or later? And how would that behoove us as an organization? So the group is looking at that as far as lessons learned. Do we have an owner's rep for every project? And which projects do we have an owner's rep for? The off-ramps, all of that. So you're exactly right about that. So the team has had lessons learned, and we can bring that information as well. We can talk about CMAR.
My suggestion, Jay and Ray, is bring Rick. I mean, this is what Rick does for a living. Just get his thoughts of, how can we improve the process going forward?
And I would ask that when you bring something like this, some of this history of just, that one slide doesn't really explain to us where we started how we got here. It just tells us what we got and not how we got here. And did the projections of the when we started, we wanted 3 million gallons per day. And now we're at 4 million. We've determined through studies we need 4 million, or did we start at 5? And understanding that process and what the budgeting was and whether it's under budget or over budget and for projections. And that's the kind of information I think would make it much more transparent for us. It's very difficult for us to sit here and say, okay, sure. And so forth.
So Mr. Morales, I'll take that one because I designed the slides. But in your packet, there is more information that procurement provided. Now, it's not everything you've outlined today. It doesn't track budget and estimates over time, but it does include more of the stages of design so that the board can see started at 500,000, 30% design, 60% design. So hopefully that's helpful. And Melissa can remind me what page that is on in the materials.
And can y'all hear me? It's Marty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it just occurs to me, Laura, I really appreciate your acknowledgement that we kind of missed in general the entire process that the board had approved for these level of contracts. And it strikes me as we're having this conversation, had we just been able to follow what the governance committee put in place relative to approvals, we would have had this conversation throughout the process of these contracts, not at the back end of them. So, you know, again, I appreciate you saying that we missed that process, but, you know, I wonder if, because we've got so much going on, if maybe we should consider it at a later date, reducing that 100 million back down so that we have a chance to catch up on this. And I don't know where the process for the procurement fell within the leadership team, but you know, we need to really understand how we missed that, because that's a big miss.
My suggestion to Chairman Joe DeSalvo is let's suggest, I mean, Rick is probably as knowledgeable as anybody on the board, and let's figure out lessons learned, and let's make sure we, you know, take this situation and learn from it. I don't know if that makes sense for the rest of the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Bobby, I think that makes a lot of sense. Lessons learned. And then I think also very helpful, and I think Laura and Ray are prepared to, just the contracting mechanisms available to JEA, just how we use those and what are the best ones to mitigate. I don't want to say cost overruns because that may be the wrong thing, but just ones to mitigate, you know, those final, in this case, $4 million jump up or something like that.
I'd also, Marty, I think that you're exactly right. This was a miss in the process and controls that we needed to have in place to be able to follow the guidance from two of them. There was a 21 move from uncapped to 50 million, and then later in 22 to the $100 million limit. One of the things I think that we need to be able to do is to bring back what both you and both Mr. Stein and General Salvo have asked for. We need to walk through with the board what our processes are, and when we decide to put in an alternative delivery method of construction. And then we need to be sure that we bring not just a budget item in the budgeting process to the board, but any project that is estimated to be close to this, we should bring separately. And we may need to consider that any project that is being delivered in an alternative delivery method should come to the board. There's a couple of steps in this process that I think we could improve. Most of the projects that we are doing at this size, I think, are alternative delivery at this point. Instead of a traditional design bid build, most of them are falling in this category. So we need to follow up with what the internal audit has said, and then expand on that and bring back to the board, either at the either at the next finance meeting or the board meeting, what the status is, what our plans are to fix it more specifically. These are projects that are already underway right now and are in construction. And so we've got to be able to tackle that. The information is on page 69 of the document that talks through not the budget question, which is also important, but it talks through the points along the way at specific design points, whether it's a 30% design, 60% design, or if there's something else that happened, how it moved from the original contract up to the final contract for each one of these projects. But we will bring back more information on this, not at Tuesday's board meeting. Some more information we'll be able to have at the Tuesday board meeting, but the detailed review of what the alternative delivery processes are in a coming committee meeting and board meeting.
Mr.
Okay, Jay,
Chairman.
thank you. Jay, yeah, thanks. That's a great idea, and we do need that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll continue to contract number 2.
Please.
So this is another contract connected to Greenland, seeking to put some very extensive facility pipelines and mains infrastructure that will surround Greenland. And we expect this to be online in the 4th quarter of fiscal year 25. So this contract is with Garney, and it started at $3.6 million in 2019 and expanded to $54 million in February of 2022 as JEA and the contractor agreed on costs for the reclaim main, the force main, and the water main. August of 2023, we reached final price of $61,375,355.46. I'll pause to see if there are any questions.
Just the information on page 69, because I reviewed this, but it just shows what it did at each stage. It doesn't explain it, which is what I looked at last night, and I didn't think I didn't explain it. It just says, here's what happened. So, I mean, we really just need a lot more information to really understand. As a board member, the first time I heard about now obviously I've joined in the middle of my term. I didn't start, but the Greenland Road plan was, we got an invitation to a groundbreaking. This should be the first time we're hearing about it.
Yes, sir.
And again, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I won't bring this up again, but if we had just paused in February of 22 and adhered to the structure and policy that the board had put in place, we would have paused and we'd been more aware of what was happening here. But that's going to be the case in all of these, so I won't mention it again.
If no other questions, I'll go on to contract 3.
Okay, go ahead, please, Laura.
Yes, sir. The Southwest Water Reclamation Facility is expanding from 10 million gallons a day to 16 million gallons a day. We expect that to be online in Q1 of fiscal year 26. The initial contract with Garney started at $700,000 in 2020, rose to $11 million in October of 21, as we agreed to procure major equipment and pre-construction services. We reached a final price of $114,220,667 in March of 22. If no questions, I'll proceed to contract 4.
Okay.
The project at Buckman to work on a biosolids expansion and conversion. This incorporates several capital projects to update and rehabilitate, and with a special focus on new biosolids handling capacity. Work will continue in phases until our estimate of Q2 fiscal year 28. The initial contract with Wharton Smith started at $971,000 in 2019 and expanded to $51 million in May of 2022. Currently at the 60% design stage, we're at $104,107,459.27. So the ask at this upcoming board meeting is to ratify this contract. And as I mentioned at the outset, the new process that Jenny and her team have already helped put in place will bring this one back to you in March to look at another significant increase.
At the March board meeting, we will include all of the information that we're talking about now. So some history of the project, what the original concept was, and how we got to this, point.
Thank you.
One comment, Laura, and for the my colleagues, and not to, I don't want to or suggest that we do word games, but one thing sort of, it's initial contract. If I heard correctly, Ray and some others, that's design phase type stuff. So that's where we're getting smart on what exactly, what's entailed for getting this the contract to come to fruition. And if I heard you right, it probably goes through several steps, but just mainly how, I guess what I'm saying is how these slides are worded, it almost makes you think that we signed an initial contract, in this case for $931K, and holy heck, we're up to $104 million, but it's sort of deceiving because that initial contract was design only, if I heard you right. So maybe when we have slides like this, it better articulates what stage we were paying for something. So somebody like me who's fairly ignorant thinks, wow, we went from $971K up to $104 million. What the heck's going on? And unless I'm misreading something.
Yes, sir. We will work on how we present this information since we plan to be presenting it to you a lot more frequently.
So Ted, these are all water projects. Are we financing this out of cash flow? Are we borrowing on a line, or what? How are we financing these projects? Is there a process where we have an interim step here before we bond these things?
So for these specific projects, I'll have to get with you, but since this has been done in the past, this project, we weren't borrowing any money, so we were just using cash to fund these. Now, some of these more recent payments may have been money that we just borrowed for in the last month and repaid ourselves. So, but we can get you that information as it relates to these 5 projects when we bring the other information.
But these are $500 or $600 million together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a big portion has been out of cash and, start borrowing.
Yes.
Okay.
This last one, the Buckman South, we're $104 million. I understand we've got another substantial quote unquote increase coming. That's where I'd love to know where we are in the budget process, how we got to where we are, and where we are expecting to be at the end. Because it's really hard to, approve, so, a budget in the middle or a contract, obviously in the middle of the contract that we expect to go up, and is it within the parameters and so forth. It just makes it really tough.
On the last slide for contract number 3, there was a mention of a 3% contingency because that project is nearing completion. How did staff come up with 3%? Because it seems like there's quite a jump that is occurring at the end of the 3%. What the number is, I haven't run it, but how did we come up with that? The last project looks like it's got more than a 50%, and it's only 50% increase, then it's only at 60% completion.
So the project, to go back, please.
The 3% contingency is what I'm asking about.
Okay, the 3% is while we have reached the final price of the 114 million for 100% design, we are not estimated to complete this project until, make sure, in about 18 months or in fiscal year 26. So the contingency is for if anything comes up that we are not aware of while the contractor is out there. And to be able, sometimes things come out outside of the realm of the contract itself or the project. And so that is what that contingency is for.
And I would say that that's pretty normal for much like this. That would be expected.
Specifically for this project, Ms. Humphrey, we believe we may need an additional well. And those are quite expensive.
Mr. Chairman, I'm troubled by if I was on this committee approving something that I had no idea what I'm approving. And it's big, big money. And I get the fact that we are where we are, that construction's begun, it's underway, we don't want to stop it. But I think the board is owed the explanation, detailed explanation, whether it's internal audit that goes through each of these projects and explains to us how we got from A to B, and was it legitimate? Was it negotiating according to the procurement code and so forth? I would not vote on this if I was on this committee. I might walk out of the room.
I just wrote a note to Laura a few minutes ago that I think that it might be a better idea for us to ask you to ratify this in March at the March board meeting, when we can get into the details of all the questions that you've got. They're all reasonable and questions, and we will pull that together between now and the March board meeting and make that an agenda item for the March meeting is what I would like to. I'd like the committee to consider that. So I agree. I think we've got to get more information for you.
So General, I agree with John. As you know, we should have more information of how we got here, what was projected price. There are considerations that we're all dealing with in construction today, but making sure that we are keeping contractors on point. And the other thing I keep coming back, General, is how can we make sure we don't come to this place again? I think Rick would be the right person to work with you guys to come up. And that's my suggestion, General, is get Rick to really work with these guys to come up with a process that puts us not in a position like we are in today. And I think you'd be wrong.
I would. It's just getting us the proper information so we can understand, how, going back to the original budgeting, going back to the selection process and so forth. Part of it is, we don't understand your process exactly yet, and I would say alternative delivery methods for projects like this is absolutely legitimate and proper and so forth. But there needs to be a lot more light on it.
Understood. What our process is and how successful, quite frankly, this process has been for us in the execution. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
But the whole rationale for the CMAR is that we had recognized that we were growing, especially on the water side, and there were going to be some large capital projects that were going to be coming. And it was to attract these firms that otherwise would not come and perform these. Some of the larger firms that we're talking about, Wharton Smith, Garney, only prefer to deal with these alternative delivery. So that was the impetus for this, but we hear you as far as how successful this has been and giving that information on the process.
For us to be able to ratify a contract, this is, you know, tell us what it is tough. Just telling us what it is tough.
Yeah, and so for everybody out there, yeah, one, Rick, thank you for stepping up for this to sort of lead this committee into working with the other folks on the insight into how all this, the contracting, the CMAR, how all that works. What I'd ask Jay is, so March is fine, as long as the committee member here agree with it to come back to the board. Just as you're incrementally gearing up for the March presentation, just let this committee give us periodic, updates on where you're at on it so we can absorb it. And then, but let me ask a question. Is March feasible? A lot of ground to cover. We got to move on with these projects and decide. I got that, but if March isn't, I'm just sort of concerned it may be over ambitious. If it's not, great. But any thoughts on that?
We'll have it ready by March. Not a problem.
Great.
We have one more contract to go through.
Yes, sir.
On 5.
We could go to contract 5. Thank you. So here, the new process worked. This was going to awards a few weeks ago. We pulled it to come to this committee. This project will double capacity at the Nassau Water Reclamation Facility so we can serve a fast-growing area. The initial contract with Haskell started $420,000 in December of 2020, and by October of 22, had reached $106 million at 75% design. It reached 100% design in February of 23. Negotiated contract price of $111,813,476. Again, we're asking for a contingency here because the project is 12 months away. Some of the dynamics that Ray described are in play.
I don't want to correct, but the process technically worked. It did not get approved in our awards committee, and so there's a number that's greater than 100 million. The process has to be better than that when we bring it back to you to March, that it is something that you are aware and know of beforehand. That's the second, the other step in this process. So this one did not get approved in awards by going across and crossing over what you're talking about at the governance side of things. So we technically did what we needed to do here, but we didn't do what we needed to do in updating the board appropriately. And that's what, John, I think that's what you're asking for. Bobby, that's what you're asking for, is more than just updates on this and more than just fixing it so we technically comply. It is, how do you know about these projects, these significantly large projects ahead of time? And we can say we technically complied, but I think you're asking for more than that. And so we'll get that information to you.
I mean, Jay, that's a great point, but I don't know what the total of these 5 projects are, but they're significantly more than 500 million. I just want to make sure that, we are doing these things, whether they're 50, 10 million, do we have the right process? And are we best in class in trying to, making sure these, under today's circumstances, doing these projects, number one, do we need them? Number two, how are they financed? Number three, are we getting the best price for what we're doing? And I think that's the more important thing. It's just understanding that and feeling comfortable with that. Because I think, to me, that's my biggest interim.
Yeah.
And
I agree. The best value there is agreed. But just for instance, February 2023 was a year ago. This price was a year ago. Do we have an updated price or what's happened in the last year?
that should have been.
You know, that's the typo. It's February
Oh,
24th.
okay, okay. I'm just looking at this.
I was looking at the same thing.
Okay, all right,
Yeah, you're not missing.
okay.
But it still is kind of a question because I'm glad the process worked in October of 22 and it stopped. But I mean, here we sit 5 months later. I think part of the process review that needs to happen is how quickly can you get this to us? Because we've had a couple of meetings between October and today. So, we don't want to slow things down. We just need to be informed. So that just is the back end of the process.
So we'll be ready to talk more about the process and the questions going forward. But one of the things that we will be bringing to you is these large, as Laura stated in her opening comments, these large projects. And initially, they may not be $100 million. Maybe they're $80 million. But we are going to bring all of these large projects to the board as we approve the budget process so that you know about them before we even do the $500,000 contract, right? We're going to build this project here for these reasons. We estimate the costs are going to be X, that's where you start, tens of millions of dollars. And so if there's concerns and questions, we can address those as we move forward through the budget process. And then when we come back, when we have an issue where we bump up against the approval authority, then those projects we will have already had some discussion about them. There'll be some background beforehand. And oh yes, I remember when we talked about that. And these projects are long-term projects, right? They don't get started at the beginning of one fiscal year and end by the end of that fiscal year. So we can also give to this committee updates on a regular basis on those large capital projects. And if something happens that swings those budgets one way or the other, we can bring and update the board on that as we go through the process. So we will be engaging more on that. That's part of the new process, is to engage this committee and the board more as we move forward.
But there are two things. One's process, and the reason we raised the amount of approval was for fuel, not things like that.
Right.
So I just want to make sure the thinking is when we raise the amounts, limits on approval was for fuel. And I want to make sure we have process right, but also my biggest interests are we doing these things, with the most efficient cost possible? We can go through all the process of making sure the process right. We're still, spending an extra 10, 20%. Is there ways that, we understand that we're getting these projects delivered as cost efficiently as possible with the best product possible?
And totally agree with you. And that should be for a project that costs $1 million or $100,000 that we wouldn't normally bring to you, but we need to have those controls in place to make sure that we're not spending extra money on any of those things. So thank you.
On these kind of projects, because I want the process to not bog you down. I want the process to be efficient and we feel comfortable, but also want to make sure, is there another 5% we can take out of this cost? If anybody thought about that, or of the 5 projects you're talking about, that's real money. Are people thinking about that? Are we in the hands of the contractors in that process?
And I would add to that, that I would like to understand, there's a vendor name that has repeated in here. Is that vendor giving us, discounts for multiple projects? Are there any, if you have a certain dollar of spend with the vendor, is there a, price break that occurs? I would like to have an understanding of that as well as we're talking through discounts.
Okay. We'll bring all that information to the chair's question, as far as when we get a initial guaranteed maximum price, there is a team of folks that look at that price, and there's not an acceptance of the first one if we don't believe or if the team doesn't believe that's a good price. So that is.
Yeah, I understand
that's
that. I'm,
taking place.
the chairman's on the.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez.
yeah. But I'm just a sitting member here, but the big thing is.
But we'll bring that.
Yeah, but I do think, can we look at that group that's looking at this stuff and they put a critical eye on it? And is there a substitute if you have a contractor holding to get somebody else to come in? Is there a thought process? I just look at that today, well.
Yeah, I mean, and as you go through again, just this overview, it appears, we go in for design and then do we go back out and bid for the project work? Because it feels like in many cases, we're going from a design cost of $500,000 to a project cost of over $100 million. So I just think we need to really pause and make sure, to Bobby's point, we're getting the most out of each of these projects from a cost perspective, because we're going to have more of these, not less.
And another question, as vendors are bidding on the initial project, are each vendor having to submit their projection along the way? So as it goes from design to the various milestones that you have set up, so that we're able to compare how competitive the process is all along, and globally, are we getting the best price for it when we look at the project from start to finish?
On the initial, the vendor is chosen based on qualifications. So there are proposals on this process. The CMAR is chosen based on qualifications. And then as that CMAR progresses at the different design milestones, they give you pricing. Not other vendors, just that vendor gives you that pricing based on that, at that level of design. But that price is scrutinized by statute. Thank you, Dan.
I think that's part of what we've got to bring back to you all is the very base level. What is the difference in this style of alternative delivery here, the CMAR construction management versus?
I think we need to bring back, Board Member Lanahan mentioned, the different delivery methods. There's a design, bid, build, where there's a designer that comes in, they give you a design, we take that design, and then we get bids for it. Bids based on price to construct, and that's the low bid. And so you've got that process. There's pluses and negatives with that. And then there's what we call these collaborative delivery, from design build, where you have one entity to this, which we're utilizing, or which we're talking about today, which is the CMAR, construction managers. And we can go over all of those, the pluses and minuses of those, including the competitive nature, the timing, and the risk. And all of that is part and parcel of each one of those deliveries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do is on, for these 5 contracts here, again, we'll just shelve those, wait till the March Board of Directors meeting, and then just get all the details that everybody here has been talking about. One question I've got for the last one, the contract 5, 12 months out. Again, we still need more details, but I don't think no decision today, would that get this thing off track? 12 months, you're starting getting closer to completion. I don't think it would, but is there anything we need to know about that from a risk thing?
It will not get it off track. These are projects that are underway. And so the projects are continuing through the process. We're not, we can't stop this. I don't think it would be appropriate to stop the projects. And so, so there will continue to be dollars spent while we're figuring this out. But not a problem. And it's also not a problem, to your point. The fuels is something that has to go very quickly. Adding several steps in this process so that you all are completely and totally aware and proving things is not going to change a schedule on the project of this size. And when we're starting some of these in 2020 and they're not done until 26, and some of these started in 19. I mean, some of these they're long-term projects that putting an appropriate step in the process to keep the board aware, and potentially a series of steps in the process. Because I mean, quite frankly, if we approve a 60% design at 110 million, and the 90% design comes in at 130 million, that's 2 approvals that should be required by the board, not just the one. So we'll bring all that information back. It doesn't affect time at all.
Okay, great. Okay, pending any further comments, I think we're going to the compliance, or was there one more?
There is one.
A little bit different.
It's a little bit different. One more slide.
Okay, Laura?
Right.
So in the spirit of starting to bring you all more information about significant contracts that might reasonably leap out to you from budget presentations or capital discussions or O&M discussions, the procurement team brought us this long-term service agreement as well. It dates back to the year 2000 when we entered into a long-term contract for inspection, repair, and maintenance of GE combustion turbines at our different generation sites. The contract will expire in December of 2028. It jumped to 264 million back in 2017. The average annual spend is about 14.5 million. We're not asking you to approve this one or ratify it. It's been over those spending limits for now almost 7 years. But we wanted to tell you about it today in the spirit of letting you understand that we are going to start bringing you more information so that you are not going over the budget and noticing a contract for 330 million and wondering, what does that mean? How did we get here? So that is the reason for including this electric side contract today, only for informational purposes.
But the question is, if we did this thing, is there alternative bidding opportunity on this situation? Or are we just, renewing this contract? Is there alternative?
For this one, I think the answer is that we are married to GE until December of 28. They built our turbines and they maintain them.
Has anybody looked at an alternative?
So this GE is the OEM for this equipment when it was started. So they were the natural one to go with. And even though this is a 30-year, the team did look at other entities and look at their pricing, and GE's pricing was competitive with the other entities that could provide these services.
Recently, we've looked at alternatives.
Yeah, I think it was, and if Ricky's online, I think it was within the last few years that we looked at pricing and said, all right, GE, is your pricing competitive with this? And if anyone wants to add more to that, but yes.
Just, so March 2021, was that the yearly spend was 23 million? Or the contract went up by, what is, so the yearly spend?
No, that's not the yearly,
Okay.
that's not the yearly.
Okay,
spend.
what is
It's
the-
just in tranches. So in 2021, say there is projected maintenance work to be done or outages or what have you I forgot, this 23 might have been for 3 years or 2 years.
Okay.
That's what that is.
Okay.
That's what it's for.
Just wasn't clear.
Yeah, so we just want to, as Laura was saying, we want to make sure that you all for awareness know this, but this is basically a long-term maintenance contract that's been in place since 2000.
So it looks like a few years they bring you a new, so now it's gonna be this.
They bring us pricing based on what the work is.
Right. So it's maintenance work, so we will take a generator offline based upon the number of hours or whatever the criteria is. And then that will be where we get the pricing. So it's not like they're coming in and doing the same thing every year. It depends on what asset will go into outage for a number of months, and what, do they have to rebuild the whole turbine, or do they just have to check something?
Okay, any more comments or questions on this? Okay, thank you. Let's go to the Randall Barnes for the compliance and disclosure policy.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. Randall Barnes, Treasurer here at JEA. So today I'm going to talk about the compliance with JEA's disclosure policy and procedures and the annual disclosure reports that we are required to do. Each year we're required to file annual disclosure reports with the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board to comply with investor continuing disclosure obligations. The ADRs contain financial and operating information for each of our systems that are included by reference in the bond issuance and reoffering documents. Federal anti-fraud laws apply to disclosures made by JEA in connection with bond offerings and required periodic filing. So as board members, you may not authorize disclosure you know to be materially false or misleading. You may not authorize disclosure while recklessly disregarding facts that indicate that there is a risk the disclosure is misleading. And you must apply an elephant in the room standard, which means if you're aware of any pressing financial or operating issue, then you're responsible for knowing how those issues are disclosed to investors before authorizing the bond offering or any disclosure. So the most important things for you to know are things that you can do, or you can become familiar with the disclosure documents. And you can also ask questions of JEA's leadership and staff about the disclosure of any issue that might exist. The good news is you can reasonably rely on staff to prepare disclosure material. Delegation to staff is acceptable, provided that a sound process is followed and they have the training necessary to confidently meet JEA requirements under federal anti-fraud laws. The board approved amended disclosure policies and procedures back in May of 2022. And these policies and procedures follow the SEC guidance on the preparation of disclosure and how staff are to go about preparing disclosure materials. So in the package today, you've been provided with draft versions of the ADRs to review between now and the March 2024 committee meeting. These versions are what I would call nearly complete, with only the appendices needing to be added. Prior to the March 2024 meetings, we will provide substantially final drafts that will include the appendices as well as red line versions comparing them to the versions you've received today. And my report to the committee and board in March will state the compliance with our disclosure policies and procedures and ask for approval of the ADR so they can be filed to meet our disclosure obligations. If at any time during your review of these disclosures, please or believe that there is a chance that the disclosures are misleading, or know or become aware of anything that's potentially material, or simply just have questions about the disclosures, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or the leadership team, and we'll be happy to assist in any way possible. So just a quick refresher of the timeline. Today, we are providing you with substantially final drafts of the ADRs, but not including the appendices. We're not asking for any approval today. We're providing the drafts for your review. Next month, at the committee and the board meeting, we will ask for your approval. We'll provide a red line version, meaning, there could be changes that happen between now and then related to disclosures that need to be made. We don't expect many at this point, probably clerical error, things that we need to clean up, but the red line will be provided, and we'll be asking for your approval of the ADRs. And then following board approval, we will file the disclosure with the EMA website, the Securities Rulemaking Board. If there are any questions, happy to take those.
Any questions at all?
Just one other comment, Mr. Chair. This is basically the same process we use every other year. So this is an annual disclosure thing that we are required to do, but there's nothing really new in this process.
Right. Okay, thanks, Ted. Okay, pending no questions, I think we can move on to the internal audit with Lee Martinez.
I'd be delighted to give a proceed.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee and board members. My name is Lee Martinez, Director of Internal Audit. I appreciate the opportunity today to provide an update on internal audit. First off, I did want to talk about some initiatives that we're working on for internal audit. First is standing up our quality assurance and improvement program, which is an internal and external, there's internal and external parts to it. Internally, we're ramping up our procedures in order to make sure that our work is quality work, that what we provide is in tune with the IIA, Institute of Internal Audit Standards. And then later this year, we're going to bring in a consultant to do an external review, which is required by the IIA every 5 years. Results of that external review will be provided to the committee for review. Additionally, we're working on improving our software, internal software. Just wanted to say, replacing the current software with this new preferred software will save us around 50% annually on software costs. This next slide has to do with internal audit charter updates. Every year.
What's that called?
Currently, we pay $60,000. We're looking at, excluding one-time implementation costs, we're looking at 24, 25 ongoing. This next slide has to do with charter. Internal audit charter is presented to the committee every year, when to be reviewed and to incorporate any updates. This year, updates are very minimal. It has to do with committee names. It has to do with my title and some outdated information related to the enterprise compliance and risk committees. So that information was taken out. Now, with the implementation of global audit standards early next year, there may be some bigger changes to the charter, but we can tackle those next year. Finally, audit and action plan status report. This information covers first quarter of this fiscal year. We completed the JEA performance pay audits. We assisted E&Y in their audit. We provided 2 resources. I think EY reported on that past board meeting. And we always assist on the TEA or the Energy Authority audit. We provide resources as part of partners, of us being partners of TEA. We are currently working on several audits. Some of them is sales tax, landscape contract review, recruitment services, receivables, and collection. Open action plans, we have 15. All of them are, on task, on plan. None of them are past due. We have closed for fiscal year 24, 6 audit plans. I did want to highlight 2 action plans that we closed. One had to do with the construction manager at risk, the CMAR contract language. Based on our review of the CMAR contracts, we provided business with some recommendations to update their contract language. That was accepted, and it went through the review of the general counsel office. That was also approved. The other action plan that was closed had to do maintenance, preventive maintenance on vehicles, fleet vehicles. So that concludes my presentation. I welcome any questions.
Okay, any questions?
I would just love to see the internal audit for the CMAR process.
We did complete a CMAR process, an audit, a review, and that report can be provided.
All right. I'd like to see that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think I need a motion to approve the, just the replacing the names of the committee and updating the title.
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Wallette, please.
Good morning. As you know, JEA's ethics program plays a pivotal role in ensuring that we operate with the highest standards of integrity, transparency, and ethical conduct. We have invested in comprehensive training programs to educate all of our employees on ethical standards to foster deep understandings of our commitment to ethical behavior and prepare our workforce to navigate some complex ethical dilemmas. Our annual ethics training program begins next month in March, and we will offer courses tailored to all employees based on their roles and responsibilities, and our managers will receive more intensive training, which will include reminders about open government and sunshine laws. Since October 1st, we've received 5 hotline cases with 3 currently open in labor relations. These cases have involved workplace harassment, environmental protection, improper use of equipment, and workplace retaliation. None of the closed cases have resulted in any type of ethics violations. Therefore, Labor Relations has conducted the investigations and will work with management on resolution. All of the 20 ethics inquiries that have been received from employees have been closed within 36 hours of receipt. Most inquiries have come from new hires who are not familiar with city government guidelines. So what I've done is updated our new hire orientation component on ethics to provide more examples and guidance for our new employees. Some of these examples include conference attendance, who pays for it, and what if I get invited, gifts received by vendors, and what is classified as secondary employment. We value the guidance and oversight provided by the Board of Directors, so I thank you for allowing me to present today. And your commitment to upholding our ethical standards sets the tone for the entire organization. So I encourage any ongoing collaboration or insight that you may have for our program.
Great. Thank you, Wallette. Any comments or questions? Okay, great. And let's go on to rating agencies presentation. Ted and Joe.
Okay, good morning. So we're gonna do a little tag team here on this one. So as you are aware, we meet annually with all 3 of the rating agencies to give them updates on the result from the prior fiscal year and what our plans are going forward. At the request of the board last year, y'all asked that we bring forward these presentations before we actually have them with the rating agency. I think in the past, we had just reported back to you after we had met with the rating agency. So today, we are doing that. The planned meetings are next month. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Randall to go over the highlights of the presentation that will be giving to the 3 rating agencies in the next few weeks. Joe?
Thank you, Ted. Good morning, General DeSalvo, Chair Stein, committee and board members. Before I get into the presentation itself, just to address a question that Chair Stein had raised about financing earlier, our bond resolutions give us broad authority to finance virtually any capital program that we have at JEA. We were not intending to be borrowed under the revolver at year end, but 2 things happened during the year. First of all, inventory, which is carried by the water system, and we're working on changing that, but water had inventory of about $36 million higher than the prior fiscal year end. And then the capital program executed by the water system, our expectation was $400 million. And what we presented to the council in our budget was $400 million. We ended up spending slightly over $490 million. So we ended up being borrowed approximately $127 million at year end. That figure grew to $177 million in February. Prior to closing the bond financings, we refinanced the revolver. And so the only draws under the revolver right now are for DES, about $11 million. So the revolving for DES, $11 million.
The district energy.
On a $500 million revolver. So we'll go through that same type of bridge financing for water this coming fiscal year, and then we'll talk about electric here shortly. You'll recall these slides. On this particular slide, we do show the electric and water system side by side with 3 of our key metrics. Debt service coverage has been phenomenally strong. And that's really due to the debt defeasance and retirements that we did beginning in 2019, 2020. And we have concluded that early debt retirement strategy. So you'll see these numbers come down more in line with our historical levels. Debt to asset ratio, extremely sound, below 50% for the first time, I believe, in a generation for electric, about 36%, 37% at year end for water. Again, these are at 25 plus year lows. Days of liquidity in the electric system remains quite strong, a little bit of a drop, but again, significantly higher than our pricing policy metric. Water, you see, drop down to 100 days. Again, that was as a result of the capital program. We started borrowing money. Obviously, our capital funds we were using in prior years, we've exhausted those capital funds. So we've begun to borrow via bond offerings. Debt management, at Jay and Ted's request, we've shortened these next few tables to include only the last few fiscal years, and then the budget for 24 and then 25 through 27 forecast numbers that align with the financial planning and analysis, Julie Crawford's long range forecast. So you'll see the electric system begin to borrow some both under the revolver and then ultimately replaced by bond financing. There's a placeholder for a combined cycle generating facility at Greenland that is yet to come before the board. It will come before the board. We have it in our long range forecast because it's part of the IRP. That was
in your forecast. How big a megawatt system would you have planned for?
600.
600.
I think it's 571 to be exact.
No.
It's
600 at Greenland.
Correct. And that would ultimately replace Northside 3.
Yeah.
We've had a $2.8 billion debt reduction since the peak. The peak was back in 2009, $4.3 billion. So you can see the improvement that we've made consciously to put this system in a position to take on new debt for Greenland. I do like this slide, what we committed to versus our outcomes for fiscal year 23. we missed a few of these, I would call it marginally, because the numbers on the right-hand side are strong by any AA metric. And we will, in front of the rating agencies next month, continue to push for AA ratings for the electric system by Moody's and S&P. We're there by Fitch right now, but we believe these metrics warrant a AA rating. And a couple of points, again, we talked about the debt to asset ratio being below 50% for the first time in quite a while. The capital program was in line with expectations, and we did have some unit sales growth, although you see in coming slide that on a weather normalized basis, we remain relatively flat. And here's a chart for, again, you'll see a slightly higher number. You saw in the IRP a slightly higher number. I believe we have a insignificant increase in the 10-year site plan as well. For financial forecasting purposes, we assume no unit sales growth. This is a new slide. We thought this would be instructive. We show this slide every year to the council auditors, and also the mayor's budget review committee. It breaks down the different components of our annual revenue requirements. And you'll see the fuel was a significantly larger number in 22 and 23 as well. That number has come down. Fuel prices are moderating. Natural gas right now, I believe, is around 160 per MMBTU. So we're hopeful that we can deliver under this forecast. But for 25, for 24, this current year, we're about just under 75% hedged. A couple of things I'd like to point out, other than the fuel and purchase power, the non-fuel purchase power numbers kind of stick out on this chart as well. There's quite a bit of noise in 22 and 23. We were funding in those 2 years the non-fuel purchase power rate stabilization fund that we intend, and that's the box that has 260 million in 22 and 320 million in 23. We were funding a non-fuel purchase power rate stabilization fund. There's about 245 million in that fund that we can use to offset future rate increases. We also were retiring, power parking and shearer debt as well. And that ran through this fund as well. So going forward, you would see these numbers drop down to largely represent Vogtle. And there's a little bit of the FPL PPA that replaced shear in that number as well. But they are, again, some extraordinary items in 22 and 23 which caused that.
And just for clarification, can we go back to, this may be obvious to all of y'all, but I had to ask this question. So the A's next to 21, 22, and 23 stand for actual. The B 24 is for budget, and the F in 25, 26, and 27 is for forecast.
Sorry, Ted.
No, that's fine.
The other thing we should look at over a period of time, we got a 20-year contract on Vogtle. There might be an opportunity with some of the members of both, some members of MEAG that would want to, sell some of that long term. If they needed money at any point in time, you probably could buy out some long term opportunities. I know that the opportunity is not now, but I would keep your eye on that.
I believe beginning 9 years from now, or it's around the 10-year mark, in the First Amendment that was negotiated to settle the litigation that was outstanding that Mr. McElroy handled. We have a right of first refusal on any of the members that choose to sell their respective ownership interests.
But I think at some point there might be an opportunity. I just keep your eye on that.
Certainly. slide's a little busy, but I'd like to point you to the capital spending line, which you see beginning next year in fiscal 25, it starts to ramp up. And again, those are monies that are being spent for as a placeholder for Greenland Energy Center. And along with that, we have funds from debt issuance up at the top. So beginning in 25, we will bridge finance a certain amount of that money. And again, we financed up to 177 million for water, but I think we would likely alternate those. So to keep as much of the revolver outstanding as possible, we would alternate financings at different parts of the year. We haven't really talked through the timing on electric yet, but the intent would be to keep as much of the revolver outstanding as possible. And financial metrics forecast remain quite strong, again, consistent with AA ratings from a debt service coverage level. The debt to asset will creep up modestly to reflect the increased borrowings for the new generation. And then days liquidity, again, certainly within our pricing policy targets, but expected to come down a little bit as we borrow. So I would also like to compliment Randall and his team for putting this presentation together under his direction, and manager AJ Soto. Shannon Tremaine has done most of the heavy lifting for this presentation. It's in the back of the package, and it's still under some minor tweaking, but really like to thank them for their diligence on this. It's an annual labor of love. I call it Treasury's Super Bowl. Ted, with no disrespect to your Kansas City Chiefs, it's the Super Bowl for this Treasury team. So thank you to them.
So the big project are the nat gas, 600 megawatt nat gas. Is there any other big project in the electric?
No, and happy to say that the depreciation for the year was, and the rating agencies looked at this, I think I mentioned this before, depreciation for electric was 226 million. The capital spend was about 10 or 15 million higher than it. In the past, electric was underspending depreciation. Something that, and that maybe that was timing, maybe it was supply chain issues, but we're happy to see, and in water, it's even more significant, the delta between the spending and depreciation.
So you don't have any future dollars in for transmission?
That's what I was about to say. The single biggest one is the combined cycle, and it is so big that whenever we answer the question on a financial side, there's not an individual project that comes close to that, but there's transmission in the long range plan, and it is a piece that we've got to really focus on going forward, because transmission, as the system changes, both internal to our system and external for bringing in energy from outside sources, is going to require a lot of changes. Some of that is calculated in the fuel cost, some of that is calculated outside, some of that is calculated in O&M, and some of that is calculated in capital. So yeah, there's some large transmission, but it doesn't get to the size of the
It wouldn't
850 million.
Yeah, it wouldn't move the needle to require external financing. I don't believe, in and of itself.
And what I understand is new transmissions, what, 25% of cost of?
Roughly, if we're bringing it in, if we have to bring it in from
Bring it
somewhere
in,
else.
yeah.
Yes, that's right. But then those would be, that one gets complicated on how it is funded and where the funding comes from.
Okay.
So, in other words, we may not be the ones building it. It wouldn't be the capital.
Yeah.
Gotcha. We still have the cost though.
We still have the cost.
No, but it would be a comparable dollar.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna walk everyone through the water system side of the equation. And thanks, Joe, for the shout out to my team. They did do a great job putting this together. So it's a lot of work, but as you said, a labor of love. you'll notice here on the debt outstanding slide, the 2023 actuals are higher than they were in 2022. This is the first time in many, many, many years that we have actually increased in debt, and that's the result of the 127 million that we drew down on the revolver prior to the fiscal year. And as you can see, we also project in 2024 a higher amount of debt outstanding. That's a result of the borrowing we just did to pay off the revolver, but also in addition to that, to fund many of these capital projects that we're already spoken about today on the water reclamation side and significant capital investment in water. And so going forward, you see, we do project to fund a significant portion of this, and later on we'll talk about how much, but a significant portion of the capital program is debt. So you see the debt outstanding amounts over time going up, and also you see the debt to asset ratio moving more towards our 50% pricing policy metric. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see the debt composition. This is as of September 30th. Obviously, we have paid down that 127 million revolver, and currently it's at zero for the water and sewer system, and we're more at a mix of about 85% fixed and 15% variable at this point.
Hey, Randall, just a quick question. What is synthetic fixed? I don't know what that is.
So synthetic fixed are variable rate bonds that are swapped to fixed. And so they're technically, we're paying a fixed rate, although the underlying securities are variable rate. So they're hedged.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're going to increase debt in the next 4 years by $700 million. Is that construction in place, in process, or is that new project?
I would say it's going to be a combination. There are definitely, I think the question I asked earlier was that Ted answered was that have we provided financing for some of the projects already underway? And we have. As we started drawing on the revolver last year, we were applying some of those proceeds from the revolver to some of those projects. And we do these financings application of financings on a reimbursement basis. So we'll spend the money and then we go and apply to applicable projects. So it's going to be a combination of the currently in process projects as well as other projects that are forecast out in the future. And in addition, some of those reclamation facilities, there's also some regulatory things that we have to fund as well.
But of that 700 or 800 million, how much is projects in process?
We may have to go back and get that exact amount. Similar slide to what Joe showed earlier. We always like to show what we forecasted and then what actually happened. The story here is really on the capital expenditure line item, and Joe already sort of went through the details on why the capital expenditures were higher. We executed really better on our CapEx program than we anticipated. So those expenditures were higher, which led to lower days of liquidity. You see the total debt increase was 117 million. That's because we needed to draw on our revolving credit facility, and it's offset by principal pay down at October 1. Our debt to asset ratio and debt capitalization ratio is slightly higher because of the additional debt. And the debt service coverage metric is a function of a combination of having to use the cash and also again, a return to where we have previously had higher or had debt pay down in previous years. That's a point in time metric. So you're gonna see that vary from year to year, and we're kind of coming back down to a more normal debt service coverage, and you'll see that in the coming slides. Just a quick view here of sales growth over the last few years. We saw a slight decrease in 21, but strong sales growth in 22 and 23. And so that's sort of the basis for the forecast of 2% year over year into the future, and that's what was used in the forecasting model by FP&A. So this is what we're going to show. It's going to reflect in our coming slides. The revenue requirement slide is sort of important view here to kind of recognize the key components are really the increased debt service as a result of the additional borrowing, and also the increased capital fund amounts that are a function of the increased capital expenditures. So those two are the major components. Also, O&M is growing as well. So you can just expect to see higher revenue requirements going forward because of those, primarily because of the large capital program. And then just to get into more detail, again, a busy slide, but the capital spending line that's highlighted in light blue is the amount that we project to spend in capital over the next several years. As Joe mentioned, 2023 was one of the largest capital program spending years in quite some time, maybe ever. And we project that we're going to continue to have in the 520 area forecast for the next 3 years through 2027. The mixture of funds from revenues and funds from debt are in the box above, and you can see that I did the math real quick. It's about 60-40 in 25 through 27, 60-40 debt versus funds from revenue. So we're kind of measuring or balancing out the impact to ratepayers today versus how much leverage we take on over time. And that will continue to be refined each year as we go through and create this 3-year financial plan.
So what percentage of that capital spend for Senate Bill 64?
I actually don't know exactly, but I don't think it's a large percentage at this point, because a lot of that is early stage design and things like that. It's further out the capital plan when you start getting into more of that. But Jay,
28, 29, 30 is when that would really hit. But this is not significant in this first 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And then finally, just a review of the projected financial metrics. Again, the debt service cover is going to remain strong, obviously a little higher in 23. That's for the same reason that Joe mentioned on the electric side. We had several early debt pay downs that impacted the last few years, and now we're coming back down to a more normal level on debt service coverage, but still well above our pricing policy metric. The debt to asset percentage is going to creep up towards our pricing policy metric of 50%. That's the result of the capital plan, and it's good that we're we have these metrics in place, because that's going to be what helps us balance how we need to plan going forward with regard to rates and how much leverage we need to take on. And then finally, the day's liquidity. We mentioned earlier that it was a little low and still above and strong and above our pricing policy metric in 23, but primarily because of the borrowing that we did and the amount of expenditures taking place. That's going to be in more managed to a normal level of 140 to 150 days liquidity each year as we go forward, largely impacted by time. I think that's the last slide, so I'm happy to entertain any questions. And thank you all for your attention. Obviously, the full package is in the full presentation that includes a lot of demographic things and more detail on projects that we're working on and things like that are included in the package. And would welcome any comments you have on that. obviously the meetings aren't until March. So if you think there are things we need to add or anything, we're happy to take those back and include them.
And I think the general message of our presentation going to the rating agencies is that, yes, we are planning to borrow more money in the future, but we have positioned ourselves to be in a good position to do that and stay within the financial metrics that they like to see for a AA rated agency. So.
When I was looking at the.
Hey, I'm sorry. Hey, Ted, what's our, can you refresh my memory? What's our current agency ratings right now for electric and water?
Electric, Fitch is the only agency that has electric at AA. S&P and Moody's are the highest A rating. We're working on that. And then on the water side, we're AA across the board. And I think we're AA plus by S&P, and Moody's is on positive outlook for upgrade to AA plus. So Fitch is hanging in there at AA. We're going to make a case for the water system to be at AAA. We think the numbers justify it, but we've done that for a few years now.
Great presentation, guys. Yeah, Joe, they did a great job.
Just looking at some of the detail in some of the presentation, some of the, I guess the funds that y'all maintain independently, and one that just kind of surprised me, or just I questioned it, the electrical system self-insurance property fund is basically flat, but obviously the cost of everything is, we're seeing that everything keeps going up. Should that be?
It is.
Should that be indexed, or should
Something
that be?
we should probably take a look at. We haven't touched that.
Yeah, I mean, that was
In a
one.
number of years.
And then the other one was the rate stabilization fund. That one went to zero.
It did.
And so, but there was another one that went to zero.
The fuel rate stabilization fund, because we switched to a monthly
Right.
fuel adjustment. So we eliminated that, but the non-fuel purchase power is the one, I believe it was at 246 at the end of the year.
Yeah.
That's the one that we're going to use to offset rate increases that'll be required in the electric system, largely because of Vogel.
Right.
And when Unit 4 comes online, it's going to be a significant monthly. We've said 4.7 billion over 20 years. So it's a big obligation.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, good. Is there any new business or open discussion?
My only comment, Joe, is keep warm.
Actually, it's a balmy 28 degrees right now, Bobby, which is 25 degrees warmer than yesterday. So,
wow.
Okay, nothing heard. Again, great meeting today. Thanks for all the folks who did the presentations, all spot on. A lot of ground covered, a lot of ground to continue to cover. So look forward to the board meeting as we get back on the contracting, specific details, et cetera. But at this time, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joe.